Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Asheville City Council meeting. If you could just take a moment to silence your cell phones. And if you have signed up to speak on tonight's agenda, good. If you change your mind and you hadn't already, you can just step out in the hall at any time and sign up to speak on our agenda this evening, and it will show up on our screen and let us know that you'd like to speak on an item on our agenda. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, as we say that Pledge of Allegiance tonight, I would say that it has a resonating meaning for me and I think for a lot of people as we face a lot of challenges in our nation and a lot of questions that are being created in our communities. We want to send our hearts out to anyone who doesn't feel safe and secure in their homes and in their businesses and our communities. We think of Asheville as a place that's open and welcoming to everyone, and I hope that continues to be the case. Today we have received, as everybody has in the United States of America, a memorandum for heads of executive departments and agencies regarding a temporary pause of agency grant, loan, and other financial assistance programs. It was issued by the Office of Management and Budget to yesterday. And it directs federal agencies to respond to the memorandum by February 10th regarding programs, projects, and activities that are subject to this spending pause. So like most cities and counties and states and school districts and all kinds of folks that are recipients of federal funding, we are looking for guidance as to what this two-page memorandum means and how it impacts our community, our funding, our recovery. And so I just want to make sure the community is aware that we are paying attention to this. We are trying to find guidance. We have a lot of media inquiries regarding it as well, and I've put out a statement, and I know the... Sorry.
Don't mind us.
It's a very serious moment. Hello?
Sage, can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, hello.
That's great. We are happy to have you. And Mayor is in the middle of a statement, so I guess we'll just...
Yeah, we're going to keep going. Sage, thanks for joining. Sage is obviously joining us by phone. Sage Turner, Councilwoman Sage Turner. We can see the phone. You can't, but it's there. So I just wanted to briefly touch on that item as we begin tonight. That's kind of a fast-moving development, and we're going to continue to track what it means for our community and for our residents. Okay. With that, I'm going to move on to the consent agenda. Folks, we have a consent agenda before us. I'm going to ask if there's any questions or comments. There is one item that I asked to be on this agenda, and it is an item, let me see what item number it is, H, which is, of course, on the second page. And I did see Tony McDowell here. Do I not see him anymore? Okay, I'll slowly say his name, Tony McDowell. Item H is a motion to direct staff to send the response to the auditor's findings, recommendations, and fiscal matters to the Secretary of the Department of State Treasurer regarding the city's 2024 audit upon obtaining signatures from a majority of city council members. And Tony, if you could just explain that this is a letter that we're required to provide, and just if you could explain a little bit about what this is and why we have to sign it, and just so we have a better understanding of that.
Yeah, happy to. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. So I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, the state implemented a new performance indicator program that goes along with our annual audit every year. And when our external auditors submit that audit to the state, they fill in a form that has these performance measures in it. And if a performance measure is a decrease or a decline or something that sets off a red flag, then the state will send, the auditors are required to report that to the state, and then city council is required to follow up with a letter acknowledging that performance indicator and acknowledging a plan for improving if necessary. And so we've gotten these indicators the last couple of years due to findings in our audits. This year we didn't have any findings, we had a clean audit, but we did have our fund balance go down, and that is one of the performance indicators. And so we put together a letter for you all to sign. The state requires that it's signed by a majority of city council. And so we asked you all to sign that, and then we send it into the state. It's the local government commission, the state treasurer's office that requires this. So if we weren't to fulfill this obligation, it would likely impact our ability to borrow money. The LGC is considering approval of our 2024 GO bonds at their March meeting. So if we were to not submit this letter, it's potential that they could pull that from their agenda and not approve that debt issuance. So maybe did that kind of answer your questions?
Yeah, so if our fund balance were to go down $1 from the previous year, would we have to sign this letter?
You would, yeah. So the performance indicator is if you budgeted fund balance in your general fund budget and your fund balance goes down, and it doesn't specify an amount, if it goes down by any amount at the end of the year, then you have to submit this letter. So
And is it, if it goes below what we budget it to be, or?
if it goes down at all, we had actually budgeted $8 million in fund balance, and we only used $4 million. So we used less than we had planned, but because it went down, again, at all, we had to submit this letter.
Okay. Council, do you have any questions about this? I know only a majority of us have to sign the letter. Do any of you have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the letter? Okay, thank you very much for touching on that item for us. Any other questions, comments, or a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We do not have anyone signed up to speak under the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And thank you very much. We've approved the consent agenda. And just as a little refresher, those attending by phone cannot vote, but they can participate in the meeting. Next, we have the manager's report, and I'll turn it over to the manager, Deborah Campbell, for that report.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. What you have tonight in terms of the manager's report is going to be an update on the affordable housing plan and our implementation strategies. We provided an update in September prior to Helene, and obviously lots of things have changed since that time, and so we wanted to come back, provide you all with the path forward, with the assurance that we are still dedicated, passionate about addressing affordable housing in our community. Unfortunately, though, again, things have changed, and the time frame for implementation may take us a little longer, but we are still working on it and just wanted to provide you all with an update. So we have Nikki Reed and Stephanie Dahl that's going to provide you all with an update, and we'll be more than happy to respond to any questions. I will warn you that this may be a little longer than we traditionally do in terms of the manager's report, but we'll step through those slides as quickly as possible.
It's traditionally like an hour.
We're ready for it. Great, Nikki Reed, Director of Community and Economic
That
Development.
wasn't nice, Mayor.
It's always good information.
With Stephanie Dahl, our Director of Planning and Urban Design, to talk about housing tonight. So we wanted to share that we are rebooting our strategy around Council's goal of equitable and affordable housing and stability with an eye towards the region's overall recovery. So we're here to share some revisions to our work plan. We want to maintain our anti-displacement strategies, funding programs, and the zoning tools that we talked about in September to promote housing across the community. So note that while the storm reshaped our timeline and our approach, not all tasks were delayed. In fact, the strategies of rental assistance and home repair were reprioritized in response to Helene and are well underway. We continue to make progress on the Housing Trust Fund. We'll talk about that later, on projects, and are working towards multiple loan closings there. Key differences to highlight from our original schedule of work that we talked about on September 24th is really that our housing trust fund cycle has shifted back into accepting applications on a rolling basis, and that the zoning and regulatory strategies that require council action were paused, but they are now back on track, and we'll go over the timeline for those to come forward to you. So we anticipate the need here to respond quickly, and our revised timeline is really projecting out the next 6 months. So you will see some reference tonight to the CDBG-DR, so council will see a larger discussion around that process on February 6th, but we did want to share that these efforts will ultimately feed into that process, so you'll hear us reference that a little bit tonight. So with that, I wanted just to take a moment to do some context and background. So again, we held a work session right before the storm on September 24th to really talk about council's goal around housing. In this, we identified a work plan that focused on implementing the strategies from the recently adopted Affordable Housing Plan, and then also talk about updates to our UDO. But since the storm, we shifted to really think about and respond to the emergency with response efforts. We worked on programs to address housing insecurity, such as rental assistance. Home repair funding came through City Council. We expedited permitting for temporary housing and repair, and we supported existing housing projects that were in our pipeline. In addition, the development of the recovery framework also led to the creation of the Housing Recovery Support Group. But this group was able to leverage a lot of the lessons learned from our Affordable Housing Plan and use that as a key resource in shaping our response overall. I wanted to share a slide from that work session to really frame the goals that we had set, those anti-displacement strategies that would be our North Star for housing. One, improve access to affordable housing. Second, to increase city investments in programs that help low-income individuals and families stay in their homes, make it easier to develop housing overall and provide incentives for affordable housing, and then to promote additional housing options across the city as appropriate, really focusing in on residential growth in walkable and transit-supportive urban corridors. So those are our really high-level goals from the work session, and you'll see how that knits together with what came through of our housing recovery goals. So these housing goals were created after the storm, really in response to Helene. And so you'll see that first and foremost, we really wanted to understand FEMA's role in housing and disaster recovery, and really to support and leverage that work, as well as understanding HUD, the state, other local resources to support housing recovery, but to acknowledge also that where FEMA work ended, we wanted to be a bridge to really understand how we could provide assistance in those gaps, to really look at equitable housing recovery with a specific focus on supporting the needs of pre-disaster vulnerable populations. That meant that we needed to build on relationships, reach out to the community, but also be very clear on what the city's role was in that recovery and do our part within the overall landscape of housing. Our last goal here was we wanted to be prepared for CDBG-DR and be that bridge to longer-term recovery. So I'll say the next slide really starts to talk about data. So then the last part of this is we again look at the goals we had set before the storm, housing recovery goals that we developed, and then data. How does that also help inform our policy discussion? So we really needed to understand and assess the housing needs within city limits. I say city limits just because often our funding programs really restrict that use. So we wanted to be clear about the impact to housing in city limits from Helene. We're working on right now a housing report to provide to council before the February retreat. This is also going to be something that's a part of the unmet needs assessment, part of that CDBG-DR planning process. But I wanted to illustrate the types of data that we are working with and how we want to analyze those and bring those all together for council's information. So one is FEMA data. So FEMA data can tell us the number of homes that were destroyed or damaged by the storm, how many of those homes had insurance, FEMA's estimate of those losses, the number of homes that require repairs, et cetera. Then we'll crosswalk that with the SBA data to understand how their loan data can outline workforce impacts. Also, HUD will publish a housing impact assessment. We're still waiting on that to really understand their takeaways from the housing impact, and then cross-reference that with the city's own early assistance and permitting data, as well as our damage assessments. So I wanted just to take a minute also to give you an example. So I think data is best used when you have really good questions. And so I wanted to share an example of how we're looking at that data. So as an example, how many Asheville homeowners have uninsured losses as a result of Helene? When we think about homeowners and uninsured losses, this may directly correlate with a home repair program as an example. So you can see here, we take the FEMA data. We actually looked at the data update that we got on January 24th. This does not include commercial or multifamily. This is just self-reported data from individuals. So 2,350 applicants shared to FEMA that their home may require repairs. And then we continue to filter down. Of those applicants, a total of 1,402 properties had a FEMA verified loss. Then we further look down at that filter and see that of those, 1,240 had a FEMA verified loss and homeowners insurance, and 155 properties had a FEMA verified loss but no homeowners insurance. So again, just an example to share how we could start to analyze the data and help provide context. Also, we have the numbers here of the FEMA verified loss. You see they characterize those numbers in those tranches. And you can start to get a sense of what that overall damage would look like for residential properties in Asheville that FEMA has verified the loss for.
So this would have to be, you believe this is in the city limits of Asheville only?
That is correct. We have definitely made sure that we're targeting the city limits only.
And if someone would have had to make a claim with FEMA, so if for some reason someone didn't have insurance but did not make a claim with FEMA, it would not be reflected here?
That is correct. So I'll pause for any questions. Our next set of information is about the work plan, but wanted to pause. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're just going to do a walkthrough of that updated work plan. So the way we've organized this, just to give you a guidepost, is that those strategies that are highlighted in italics really reference back to those anti-displacement strategies that we talked about in September. And so you'll see that a lot of the work that we've done falls under those categories and referencing other projects that will also be on the slate. So under the strategy of helping families stay in their homes, you'll see our reference to the rental assistance programs that we funded, as well as the home repair programs that we've funded. Also wanted to share that we are beginning monthly reports on our website, and that is linked there. That will report out on the progress of those programs. Under the second strategy, we talk about incentives for affordable housing. So we want to recognize the Asheville voters approved the affordable housing bond in November. And then I have another slide that we'll go through about the Housing Trust Fund, but wanted to share more there. I also want to highlight some of the work that we're doing in partnership with Buncombe County, participating with their housing recovery support function as well. Our CDBG application cycle opened, and we have been initiating conversations around DR and kickoff meetings. But just for a minute, I want to just really dive deep on Housing Trust Fund, because I think this is kind of a bright spot to really focus on. So for the past couple of years, we've aligned our funding cycle with the county and opening those in December. Typically, that's just really in recognition that city funding and county funding is often necessary to close gaps on big projects. But following Helene, we shifted back into accepting applications on a rolling basis. We're doing targeted outreach to developers to let them know this, and we're certainly prioritizing any projects that are seeking to meet deadlines, such as the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's deadline. But we are laser focused on making sure that any prior loan commitments that we made in Housing Trust Fund that we can deliver on. So the good news is that there are currently 118 Housing Trust Fund funded units under construction. That picture is taken this past January, so that is very much current state of the West Haywood Street apartments. We had a new loan closing that happened in October that is actually for down payment assistance, so single family home ownership. And then we have 5 Housing Trust Fund loan closings that we hope to occur in the next 3 months. And hopefully that would mean additional 365 affordable units going under construction. So again, just that laser focus with some of that work. This does not include, by the way, affordable units that were funded with land use incentive grant. I believe there are 79 of those units under construction right now, or other projects that may have been affordable based off of their zoning.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
The 118 units, Do you have a sense of the impact from Helene on construction timelines? I'm guessing there was some sense of a pause. Do we know kind of the status in that? Have we been in touch with them?
I don't know exactly. I know the two projects are the West Haywood Street Apartments and Fairhaven Summit. I have been seeing some draw requests that are coming through for Fairhaven Summit, so I know that they are still working, but we can check back to understand exactly what their potential opening date would be.
Yeah, just kind of curious as we're in partnership as a funder, like, has their world changed? What does that look like? And I know you're in relationships. That'd be nice to just hear a little bit more over email sometime.
Great. Okay, my last slide before turning it over to Stephanie, upcoming work plan. So again, under that strategy of providing incentives, we expect in February to come to council to start the discussion around taking action to allocate funding from the bond to Housing Trust Fund. And then again, eyeing April as a key date to meet those low-income housing tax credit deadlines and potentially allocate housing trust funds to those requests. This other strategy is improve access to affordable housing. During the affordable housing plan process, we had talked about a centralized affordable housing rental registry. This is super important to recovery, and we continue to work with our agencies and partners that are helping to really take on this task, and so we hope to have an update in March to council. And then you're starting to see how the DR process will unfold as well. So February 6th, we'll have the update to council. February or March will be that public engagement with a March 4th date to hopefully publish that initial draft plan. And then by April, you're going to see a lot around CDBG, both with our regular funding cycle coming to you, as well as the action plan for CDBG DR coming to council. I will note the two items that we've pressed pause on are related to general funding. So that is the homeowner tax relief for low-income residents. We considered allocating from general fund to make that happen. Also, you know, our land use incentive grant program relies on general funds to fund that program. We're going to press pause to those policy revisions only to really understand what our budget reality is and how we could improve that policy to fit within our budget reality.
I have a question about that. I know that the homeowner tax relief for low-income residents, that application process already paused. Do we have an idea of how many people applied that we would be pausing it on?
I don't know, and I think I need to better understand from Tony about items that are underway versus items that we're pausing in the future. So let me get back to you on that because I need to have more clarity around that.
And it had an application deadline, which I think already passed.
Right.
So to say that's paused, do you really mean for the fall, not for last, what, just?
Right,
not the
that's what I
cycle we're
mean,
in?
yes.
You're, well, so that's kind of a funny, anyway, it's sort of a meaningless pause because we don't really know what we're doing with our next year's budget. And it's already done in this year's budget.
Right, that is correct.
So I guess the question with an example of like the school funding through the county, is it applying to this year or to next budget cycle would be the question.
Oh, wait, hold on. We learned all about this when you weren't here. So when we passed our budget to start July 1, 2024, and property tax bills went out August 2024, it was for right now, for this year, collected through now for this year's budget. So the discussion the county was having around the school is for they're having problems collecting this year's property taxes to fully fund their budget and the school budget.
I only bring that up as an example of because this information is now public in this meeting, folks may wonder if they're going to receive the funding that we're talking about pausing.
They should have
So we just
already,
needed some,
they should have already received it because property tax bills would have been late if they're paid after January 6th. So, yeah, you might want to revise that before you continue
And
to post
expand
this because
it,
it's a little
yeah.
bit confusing.
and the second question that I had was, and I imagine there's already some analysis needed, but because of the information coming from the federal government about federal funding, are we starting to put together an analysis of what voucher funding might mean for our work plan if that is being paused?
I know that, yeah, absolutely. We are trying to understand all the implications of what was shared, and we're in touch with our HUD reps to really better understand and communicate with that agency. And what I'm hearing when you say vouchers, are you referencing public housing vouchers and things like that? Yes, I think we are trying to better understand the entire landscape. Apart from the additional guidance that was shared today around individual assistance, again, we're trying to understand more
Okay.
I think as there's a collective outcry from the entire country, they're having to provide clarity on each one of these pieces, because I certainly don't think there's an intention, I hope, to stop underwriting housing for all the people that depend on public housing assistance. Yes, you're right. You never know. Would be helpful if they could provide some clarity on that.
And then as a process thing, I was watching the presentation from the public-facing agenda and then kind of comparing it to what we're seeing today. Will we have an ongoing conversation about the anti-displacement strategies at a future time?
I don't know if we have scheduled that yet.
Is that a Steph question?
Well, why don't I turn it over to Steph, because she has the remainder of the slides really about the regulatory piece.
Okay. It's on
And so-
page 5 of the online agenda is where I'm referencing it. It says anti-displacement strategies, and I would love to talk about that.
Okay. Well, why don't I introduce Steph, and then if there are any further questions, we can follow up with that. I'll check
And
into that.
while we're doing a show change here, I would just like to welcome the Charlotte City Council members who are so nerdy, they're joining us tonight. So thank you to the Charlotte City Council for having your retreat in our city this week. We
Yes.
appreciate you coming to Asheville, and thank you for being here. And I love how you like to spend your time in other cities. You go to a city council meeting. I think that's fabulous.
I just wanted to extend our greetings from Charlotte City Council to Asheville City Council, and our best wishes for a speedy recovery
Thank you.
from the horrible events of last month.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We did not come to hire Deborah.
Thank you.
Steph Munson-Dahl, Planning and Urban Design Director. This part of the presentation, we are going to follow up with some of the regulatory items that we're doing to implement the Affordable Housing Plan, the Missing Middle Study, and other council goals. As you know, staff mostly pivoted right after the storm, and we're working on other assignments. That's true with regulatory staff as well. However, we wanted to point out what those folks were working on that really supported our goals around housing for everyone, or affordable housing especially. So mostly that fell into 2 buckets: streamlining repair applications for existing housing, and also collecting and analyzing data for recovery efforts from a regulatory perspective. So for repair applications on existing housing, that looked like opening the permit center the week after the storm on Monday, October 7th. General repair and replace permits for everyone that had damage to their housing. Those fees were and still are waived throughout the declared disaster for those applications. We're turning them around as fast as we can. That happened pretty quickly. One thing that some folks don't know, that staff worked within our existing UDO and with our Historic Resources Commission and other commissions to take on some administrative development review decisions that are normally provided by boards and commissions. That really helped people out to be able to process things. One, our boards and commissions were on pause, but obviously the need for speed was pretty clear at that time. So we also collected and analyzed data to support temporary housing units, the placement of those, making sure that our regulations look through a storm-informed lens, but also consider the recommendations upcoming that I'm going to be talking about here in a minute, to look at flood hazard areas maybe a little bit differently, to see what we were incenting. In December, also, SB 382 passed, which you've heard about in this forum, in these meetings, and the definition of downzoning is one that is different that we have seen before, and so we worked with our legal team to analyze both our flood hazard area ordinances that you're looking at tonight and some of these other proposals. So what's next? Well, luckily, we are gonna reboot and bring some things to you that you are hopefully pretty familiar with at this time. So trying to reach those strategies of improving people's access to provide more housing overall, and also to look at additional housing options throughout the city. We're bringing to you batch 1 of UDO amendment updates. They are very similar to what you have heard about before, and we did have to bring them back to Planning and Zoning Commission because we did make a slight adjustment. And that adjustment really was to account for the storm impacts and really think more closely about development in the flood hazard area and also Senate Bill 382 compliance. They still focus on the same areas, so those things are removing residential parking minimums in key areas where it's transit supported and we want to incentivize people to build the most housing. It's also looking at development review level thresholds and streamlining the process where it makes sense in alignment with our comprehensive plan and other adopted plans, and also again in those areas that are supported by transit. We also have a few zoning district updates that incentivize production in very specific outlined growth areas. So you're gonna be hearing about that, and the community is gonna be hearing about that. So we're doing outreach to legacy neighborhoods, and we have 2 upcoming meetings. On January 30th, we have an in-person meeting from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. at what most folks know as either the Permit Application Center or our Public Works Building. That's 161 South Charlotte Street. The next day on January 31st from 1 to 2 p.m., we have a virtual session, and that session will be recorded and put up on our website. I'll put in a little plug here. If you haven't seen it yet, you can use your search engine of your choice and look up Asheville text amendments. And if you put that in, you're going to see a new web page where people can provide comment on any of the text amendments that we will be proposing through this coming year. It will all be in one place. It will also still be in all the other places we normally keep information for people in our Planning and Zoning Commission meeting agendas and materials and our publicinput.com pages.
Hey, Steph,
Yes.
the outreach to legacy neighborhoods, is that in addition to the 30th and the 31st?
It
Or are we
is.
saying that, okay.
Absolutely.
What does that look like?
So it looks like a multi-pronged approach to have individual one-on-one conversations and then also try to talk to the folks in the associations and have more open meetings to better understand how they believe that some of these items may impact them, so we can bring you that information. And what you're going to see here in a second is, you're going to have an opportunity as we move through the housing overlay to consider how these two things interact. And so we want to make sure that you guys are getting that information, their concerns. Yeah. So we'll be recording and bringing that information to you. Okay, and we're hoping that by February 11th, you're ready to take a look at those and that we've finished all that community engagement. So the next piece of this is our the overlay. The Housing Enabling Overlay is what we're calling this. This will promote additional housing options across the city in the areas that are most walkable, most supportive of that denser residential growth. And it will make sure that we consider the areas that are more sensitive to change as areas where we don't promote that growth. So it's probably a 2-part process. The first part is really working on that proposal itself. It's what we're calling the initial review. So we do the general outreach to inform communities. We'll do special stakeholder groups, let them know what the missing middle and affordable housing plan actually said. We'll receive input on it. We will have special education for people to understand SB 382 and how it intersects and plays out in this specific proposed legislation that we are bringing forward for a local level. And for folks at home, as a reminder, what this basically says is that we cannot down zone, and there are 3 or 4 different ways that they determine down zoning, any area without getting all of the property owners in that area's permission. So that it has some there's almost anything that could be construed as down zoning, unfortunately. That makes it a little bit interesting for us to try to work with the community on some of the items that they have been looking forward to. But we are going to be able to promote housing in the areas they need it the most. And we think we've done a great job preliminary of looking at SB 382 and making sure that we can get this done. Yeah. So during this time period, once we're in that preliminary or draft proposal, you will receive a presentation on it. So at that time, we will bring you that feedback that I was discussing. And there are two pieces that you're looking at. You're looking at text amendments, the words that say what's going to happen in these enabling areas. And then you're looking at the map. And they each have to be adopted separately. So you can love the text but not love the map, or love the map and not love the text, or both. Love them both, hopefully. Final review, after we get comments for you, we'll put it on council's regular agenda, and we'll do all the public notifications that are required. You have an opportunity then to not only approve or deny it, but you can continue it, of course, and you can request that additional work be done on this item by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So there'll be multiple opportunities for you to provide feedback during this process, is what I hope you're hearing as a takeaway. Also, that overlay can go into effect immediately if council wishes, or you can set a date for which it can go into effect.
So we have a couple of items coming to us, I believe, in our next council meeting.
Yep.
Which is obviously before we have an opportunity to see this overlay.
That's right.
So does that necessarily mean then that the changes from next meeting won't align with this next overlay?
We're working on making sure that all of it aligns. And these ones, I just switched the slide back one. These first batch of amendments, these amendments stay out of our residential neighborhoods.
So I'm talking about the cottages and flag lots.
Oh, you're talking about that amendment. Yes, that is on your February 11th agenda as well. And our analysis is that it is not completely in alignment with the direction that we have been given to adopt that housing overlay. However, if you remember, there was an amendment to the resident-led petition where he suggested that it only applied to a specific geographic area. So it doesn't apply to all the housing sensitive areas that we are looking at for the overlay, but that resident did put in, I think it's south of 40 and north of the Parkway, I believe, that's where.
AKA Shiloh.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I think that's the way it is worded. So it's a similar approach. It is a geographic approach, but it's different than the data approach that we use, which uses the maps from the Missing Middle Housing Study that analyzed where people would be most sensitive and where people actually are the furthest away from transit-related amenities. Okay. So I'm going to recap next steps for all of this so you can think of this in a comprehensive way. So this month and next month, we're doing community engagement on the batch one of those threshold changes, parking changes, and zoning district updates. And then in February, you're going to be getting an agenda briefing on CDBG-DR, a little bit more of a deep dive. You have on February 11th, and that's the 6th, I believe, and this city council consideration of those UDO amendments and that resident-led petition would happen on the 11th. And then the same month, we would be looking at dedicating funding from the Affordable Housing Bond to the Housing Trust Fund to enable that to work. Moving forward from that, we're doing more community engagement on the CDBG-DR process, working to get that action plan completed in a timely manner. And also in March, being able to give you an update on the centralized affordable housing rental registry and progress on that initiative, which is programmatic. The draft plan at that point should be published for public comment, and we are working with the community at the end of that month on the housing overlay. Through April, you'll be receiving your first round of Housing Trust Fund funding requests, hearing those CDBG funding recommendations and the CDBG-DR action plan. That's a review for submittal to HUD, which we hope to do that in the beginning or middle of April. And then we keep doing community engagement for the housing overlay through that month. By May, we hope to be at the Planning and Zoning Commission for the housing overlay. That's when we're gonna be giving you that presentation in advance of actually setting a date to consider adoption of a text and map amendment. And then throughout this whole time, we're gonna be reporting out to you about the rental assistance and home repair programs. So hopefully in our presentation, we have been able to give you a framework of what's gonna happen in the next 6 months, both from a programmatic and a regulatory perspective to support your equitable and affordable housing and stability goal. We noted that the timelines for some of this has changed. We are only doing a 6-month lookout at this point so that we can be a little bit more agile and change as things happen on the ground. We have a few different things than last time, but generally what we're working on is about the same. And hopefully you also see how this will segue into our larger long-term recovery plan. We definitely will be coming to you at multiple times during this process to update our work plan and to give you an understanding of how that fits in. So we're here for questions, or if you all want to discuss. We're really interested in your feedback, and we thank you very much.
Steph, while you're here, this looks a lot like our hotel overlay map, but it's missing a public benefits table. And so I just wanted to let my colleagues know that I still feel really strongly we could use a public benefits table to help streamline this process and get to our goals of equitable, affordable housing. It could include points we've talked about already for renewable energy, open and green space, tree canopy preservation, minority and women-owned business contracting, and depth and longevity of affordability. But if there's enough support to go in that direction, I do wonder if February 11th is enough time for engagement. Is there a conversation about a public benefits table, or do you need to
Are
hear
you
that
talking
from our
about the
council?
housing overlay or the
Yes.
UDO amendments? Okay, so the February 11th date is for the other UDO amendments. So we do have time to continue talking about the housing overlay.
So, and when we, I guess I'm getting a little confused on our overlays here because, I mean, one of the overlays is essentially a preservation overlay.
So what staff is proposing, and this is going to align better with SB 382, is that the overlay that we create, and I just want to give a brief definition of this for you all. The overlay that we would create is not necessarily a preservation. It's not freezing anything in time, as much as it's allowing existing zoning to stand in the places that are more sensitive to change. And instead, we would be creating an overlay on certain areas to say, this is where we want to drive housing, and more housing options like multiplexes are available in those areas.
So like an upzoning overlay. as
Like an
opposed to a
enabling,
preservation.
that's, we're calling it an enabling overlay.
Well, I mean,
So basically, oh,
go ahead, yeah.
so the overlay would not be in the places
right.
that were
Sensitive,
listed as the most vulnerable?
yes.
So it would just leave
So
them
everywhere
alone.
but them?
Generally, we're updating the maps with the data, so I don't want anyone to get the expectation that the map you see in the missing middle housing report is the exact same map that we are using. But yes, generally that is correct. The areas that are more vulnerable would not receive this overlay, which enables you to
Just
create
nothing,
more housing.
just nothing would happen to
it's-
that.
That's correct.
It's an underlay.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, they just wouldn't receive any change in zoning. They would
So
just
they'd be
stay the
frozen
same.
like where.
Or, I mean, they'd be the same as they are today, which
Yeah.
isn't, I wouldn't
Yes.
necessarily call anything frozen, because you could change it, but
Okay.
it wouldn't be
It's
changed.
unchanged.
But
So-
like our hotel overlay, you could bring forward any proposal for conditional zoning still. It just wouldn't be within the overlay process, like
Well,
our hotel overlay.
Right, I mean, anybody could bring a conditional zoning anywhere, I mean.
Yes.
But, but in terms of what you're talking about, it would be interesting to see what that would mean, because our hotel overlay, community benefits table is triggered when you're at 20 rooms, I believe.
It depends, we have a small and a hotel, we have a small and a large district, right? So certain things are by right, but yes, it's just a size threshold, and if you're wanting to build something, you
yeah,
either
well-
follow the rules or use the benefits table.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think the idea was you're building a really, significant project. It's large, expensive, and produces a lot of income. But we're trying to here, I think, in this overlay you're discussing is address some missing middle housing, maybe duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes. That seems very burdensome on someone who's trying to create more housing to meet our needs to also add a community benefits table when they're kind of a small time, operator.
Then
It's a-
couldn't they just not use the benefits table and just come forward to us normally?
But then that also inhibits the development. I mean, the whole point of this is to create a smooth path for infill missing middle housing so that you don't have to spend all the time and money to come here and ask permission. You could do that today. You could ask for rezoning and come here. The idea with this is that you don't have to do this. We want you to build missing middle housing, so we're gonna make it easier and less burdensome.
The zoning itself is the incentive, if we make all of the
To not
changes
have
and the
to come here and do
modifications.
this. Right, so I guess I just worry about
To have it by
loading it
right,
up
rather than going through a
with,
rezoning.
So why don't we, because I think it's 100,000 square feet, right? So if you want to do 200,000 square feet, then it triggers the community benefits table where, okay, if you meet these amount of points, you can go up even more to 200,000 square
so
feet.
that, I mean, I don't have a problem, I have less of a problem, it's a
And not
very large
trigger it to
project.
come to
But what do
here.
you do about a duplex or a
We-
triplex
Well,
or a
it would be
quadruplex?
under that 100,000 square foot. So it wouldn't trigger that extra
Benefit table.
benefits
requirement.
table. So to get more
They
housing
already
in-
have to come here if they're over 100,000 under our change.
This is a great conversation, and you're gonna get to
We
talk
can-
about it when we bring.
Well, no,
some
but
of the-
Steph,
yeah.
one of the reasons why I love that we talk about this endlessly is also drive a little bit, makes you crazy. But you need to know what this council's gonna support. And if you
It's
don't
true.
hear some of this, y'all are gonna be wasting your time. So I think, I'm not even about to say work session, but, I mean, because your example, we're already looking at a proposal that raises the threshold to 100,000 square feet. You already have to come here.
We could go to 150.
Yeah, I mean, but we would have to create a different, because we're already trying to incentivize that dense infill by saying if you're under the 100,000, you don't have to come here. So it would have to be, so I think what I'm hearing proposed is, but don't do it that way. Don't make it a by right process. Make it only trigger by right if you meet the community benefits table.
I have some trepidation about raising the thresholds and giving away council's levers without having a community benefits table.
Is that because housing is not enough of a benefit for you?
Wow.
They're not fighting words, but what I would say is there is a train of thought that more housing is just a good thing. And so don't make it so burdensome to build housing.
So-
What I do know for sure is that if we were basing it just based on the missing middle housing study maps, there are parts of the city that don't have the dense transit to support missing middle housing. That is a choice. So if we're leaving out parts of the city where we want more housing, how do I say this?
I think you do that with the overlay though, right?
You can, but we're talking about these missing middle housing maps that might be different than the study that we haven't seen yet, and we've got 2 weeks. I don't think that's enough time for meaningful
No,
engagement.
this is not
That's
coming in
not the
2
schedule.
weeks.
Yeah,
But
I
there
just want to
are
remind
UDO changes
folks
that are coming to us in 2 weeks.
The things that are coming to you in 2 weeks, they are generally for large-scale developments.
So we're not
it's
having a-
not necessarily missing middle.
We're not having a holistic conversation. We're gonna piecemeal this, and this is where folks, I think, are going to ask us to press pause, and that's where we end up with staff and delays, and we can delay it, but with just like a series of delay. We're actually not getting what we need.
I would phrase it as we're being incremental, and what we're bringing to you are things that the Planning and Zoning Commission, people that we have worked with through public comment, and generally what we've heard sometimes with council direction, are items that everyone can agree on. We're trying to bring to you all some consensus-based items. Those things are
The parking
Ordinance cha-
minimums,
Yep.
right? The
these are
raising
things
the
that are in our
thresholds.
adopted plans. So our comprehensive plan, our affordable housing plan, our missing middle plan, probably 3 other plans. And they're also based on best practices throughout the United States and probably international. So you hear them in public comment. People say remove all parking minimums. Well, we're not removing all or remove all parking requirements. We're not asking that you remove all parking requirements, but incrementally, we are saying, let's start with removing these parking minimums that people need to have in areas where we're looking to have high density development, where we don't want people to be parking.
That one's under, the next, it's those 3 ones.
Those 3.
Items right there. Development review level threshold, that is going to the 100,000 square foot.
There are various thresholds, and I would be remiss to try to spit them all out to you, but there are various thresholds for the different projects. They also incent affordable housing. So what you're gonna see is that we are raising the threshold, the more affordable housing they will provide. That is an incentive.
So
So
that's
And that
built
is something
in.
we've
So
heard
essentially
over
a
and over
density
again,
bonus.
that is a
Something
way
we
to.
asked for in the community benefits
Yes.
table.
Yes.
And again, this isn't citywide, it would be in these
These are in key
corridors.
corridors and growth nodes that have been identified.
And then the last one, zoning district updates to incentivize production in outlined growth areas.
Right, and so we're not touching any of the residential, so no RS2, RS4, none of those areas are gonna be touched. But in other areas, there are small tweaks, and one of them I think you heard about today, or you may have seen that email, was to get rid of a vacancy requirement that would require somebody to basically act as if the site is completely new and revamp the site as like a new development would have to if someone had been vacant for 180 days. So there are certain things that we're doing that we have found as a best practice that other cities do, or that we've heard time and time again that are standing in the way of us people being able to make smaller investments that move the needle for housing production. So we want you to think about this in a holistic
So I
way.
think that, you've got on there January 22nd because it came to P and Z. So when, that item will come to us in February, our first meeting.
February 11th, and these are items that, yes, so this is the second time that it went through Planning and Zoning Commission. Like I mentioned, it was
Yeah.
slightly amended.
Yeah.
Coming back to you on
Council,
February 11th.
Having had this more thorough discussion, thank you, everybody, for doing that. Does anyone feel like you're not ready to hear those 3 items on February, whenever the heck it is?
I don't know if it's those 3, but,
Those are the ones slated to come to us, so
and the flag lots and.
Are Barry's flag lots also on that
They
night?
are.
Okay, so those are separate though.
So
Those are,
I'm,
yeah, they're
I'm,
separate.
I'm ready to hear it. I will signal that if it comes to us for a vote, because we haven't done the overlay, underlay, whatever, I wouldn't be able to support it.
On the
But we
flag
can-
lots.
But we can bring
Okay,
it,
so
I'm just to know.
okay, so flag lots over here. We got, yeah, and
And-
Barry, if you're out
and
there watching,
cottages.
yeah. But, so flag lots and cottages, I hear you over there. But these 3 items that staff is bringing forward to us.
I am, for people watching, can you give examples of commercial corridors and mixed-use districts so people know what we're talking about?
Well, downtown, obviously, is a mixed-use district or a node. We have several nodes that usually they're on transit corridors, so our biggest ones are Patton Avenue to Smoky Park Highway, Tunnel Road, parts of Merriman Avenue and Hendersonville Road. Those are our main corridors. So those are our growth areas and our transit-supported areas.
So transit corridors, I mean, dense corridors.
Right, so when you're in Asheville, if you're driving around and you see mixed-use districts, if you're a majority of mixed use in that area, those are those areas that we're targeting for higher density or higher growth. And if you're driving around and you see a primarily residential area, none of these are going to apply whatsoever to those neighborhoods.
So it sounds like these 3 aren't in the areas that are listed in our displacement study anyway, essentially,
Generally, yes.
except for maybe Hendersonville Road, kind of,
Hendersonville Road, that's exactly what I'm getting at, is there's parts of certain, like every neighborhood is gonna eventually abut or be near a corridor, so that they can travel somewhere. So there are certain places where these items will be adjacent to a residential neighborhood. These amendments will impact that area.
And that will be limited by what, like a block or two or something of that nature to proximity to the corridor?
Yes, when we give you that presentation, we will show you exactly where that zoning ends. Generally, if you look at those corridors, you're gonna see a very natural delineation of mixed use like CB2 or highway business zoning in that corridor. And then there's some kind of transition where it's maybe multifamily next to the corridor, and then more in the neighborhood, you're gonna see single family. So everything is going to only apply to the districts that are directly on the corridors.
And since this outreach is on the 30th and the 31st, you'll be discussing these issues with a particular emphasis on legacy neighborhoods anyway, right? Before our February meeting?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we heard from anybody else? Did anybody else tap the brakes, or are we ready to hear those 3 items at our next meeting?
I'm ready.
I think I'm ready.
Okay, Sage, she's ready.
Never call
No,
back.
we lost the connection. Okay, you know what? You guys are smart, yeah.
Yeah.
See how long our managers' reports are?
But you did notice how long it took the staff to present Q&A. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks for
Greatly
coming.
appreciate it.
Enjoy your time here in Asheville.
Absolutely. Thank y'all.
Okay.
Okay, Mayor, that concludes our report, and we
Yes, we did it.
appreciate
Okay,
the
very good.
engagement.
Okay, so now for something less controversial. We'll move on to our only public hearing item, which is a public hearing that was previously held. So we've already had the public hearing on this item, but we do have Amy Deaton, who is back here to talk to us once again regarding a proposed zoning text amendment to Chapter 7 of the city's UDO to better align existing city regulations with the North Carolina. Listen to them.
They're so proud of us. Must be it.
Yeah.
You're not celebrating
They're
leaving.
making a ruckus out in the hall with the North Carolina State Building Code. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. Hopefully, 3rd time's a charm. So for tonight, I'm just going to highlight some of the main points that we've previously discussed. After discussion by council at the previous meeting, staff was asked for the recent flood amendments to be placed into 3 categories and brought back before council. Technical amendments are just updates and do not change permitting processes or conditions. We consider the conflict category to be those updates and additions needed to align with the state model flood ordinance, and these revisions will clarify the look-back period and historic structures exemption. Our overall intent in these ordinance amendments were to have no substantive changes, only to provide the public and those that want to develop in the floodplain clear and compliant regulations. The one possible area where it could potentially be substantive is regarding the 2-foot freeboard, and specifically for non-conforming uses. Quickly, the look-back period for calculating substantial damage and substantial improvement has been revised to clarify that this period will remain as currently administered at the 1-year period. The process for historic structure exemption, those revisions will clarify that properties with qualifying historic designation may request a variance for exemption from the elevation requirements through a quasi-judicial review process. And the revisions keeps the variance process as currently administered, so no changes there. Our outreach following the January 14th City Council meeting, staff was asked to go out and do some additional outreach. So We either participated in or arranged several community or business-related meetings to discuss these specific ordinance changes and address any questions. And we attended the SIBO meeting on January 17th. We were at the RAD Roundtable on that same day. The Biltmore Village Merchant Association's meeting on January 22nd. And we also had an open house type forum at our Public Works building on January 23rd. Also at these events, we introduced our FAST group. The Floodplain Assistance Support Team is a dedicated interdepartmental team that provides focused and personalized support for property owners as they look to rebuild in the floodplain. This assistance can be reached by email at FAST, F-A-S-T, at asheville.nc.gov. Want to plug that. So staff is recommending all of the amendments in Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances to clear up ambiguity in the floodplain regulations within the city limits and ensure compliance with state law and the National Flood Insurance Program regulations. And regarding the elevation requirements for rebuilding, these revisions will clarify a requirement to elevate or flood-proof structures 2 feet above base flood elevations. The non-conforming use, again, is a null clause and does not supersede the North Carolina Building Code requirements. These revisions will hopefully support the public and private sector's ability to receive federal grants and assistance through the NFIP. And that brings me to any final questions.
Yes, during your outreach, what was the kind of general sentiment from those groups?
Again, there were a group of people that supported the changes. There is a group, a large number of people, well, I won't say a large, I don't know how many people, but there is a group, and especially in the Biltmore Village, that do have concerns with us changing regulations during the recovery period. But there's also a group that support these and would like higher standards as well.
Thank you.
So it's mixed, and there's not a clear way.
Any other questions for staff?
I do. I don't know if you or anyone will have an answer, though, as I've been thinking about these ordinance changes. It's pretty heavy on my heart because it's just like a really hard time for anyone who's gone through this. And we also, I don't know, the river did what it was going to do regardless of our past ordinances. And that feels like some type of a truth, too. That's very hard to hold at the same time. And then I also think about like what's really going to be the driver of rebuilding. And I think about our flood ordinance as one. I think about the state building code. I also think about insurance and lenders. And so we've been spending a lot of time, we've all been spending a lot of time looking at our flood ordinance, how it relates to the building code, both regulatory levers. Does anyone have any more context on what the insurers are or aren't doing and what lenders are or aren't doing? Because I do wonder if they will have more of an impact on what can or can't happen. So I'm just kind of curious for that information. I put some calls out, but just wondering if anyone has more insight than me on the things I'm seeing is that insurance plans are getting dropped like crazy right now around here, and that North Carolina has some of the highest insurance drop rates of any state. And that was data before Helene. So it's just one of the things I think about in this is like, what is really gonna inhibit, drive, restrict, enable growth? And how much is our ordinance really leverage in that? So does anyone have any? I guess I'll just leave that there.
Sort of a rhetorical thought, but
Yeah.
one that somebody knows the answer to. And I imagine banks and insurers are kind of going to be working through this on a case-by-case basis. But it does pose a challenge for folks who need lending to be able to get a loan and to get insurance, which is usually required to get a loan. So
Yeah, it almost feels like our code is like the first step on that journey, because they want to know what they can or can't rebuild. But by the time they get to their insurance provider or their bank, are they going to be told no? But it's a little philosophical. Sorry to do that while you were there, but I've talked with several of you. This is a heavy thing to think through. So anyway.
So, council, we took public comment on this item at our last meeting. So at this point, we're ready for a motion on this item. And please look and see the motions on your.
Mayor, I would like to take a moment to explain my vote on this item.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. So, as Councilmember Ullman said, this decision has not been easy, and my concerns for our small businesses remain at the forefront of my mind. I firmly believe that our state and federal partners need to step up and provide meaningful relief for our business owners who have been hit hardest by Hurricane Helene. The burden these regulations place on our businesses is immense, and it's deeply frustrating to see local business owners, artists, and entrepreneurs left with few options, while corporate interests could stand to benefit. While the North Carolina State Building Code supersedes city ordinances, meaning that even if the council allowed rebuilding as is, the state mandates at least a 1-foot elevation above the base flood elevation. The reality of this requirement is far more challenging than it appears. For many of our businesses in flood-prone areas like the River Arts District, complying with this mandate could mean raising buildings by as much as 10 to 12 feet, given how far below the BFE they currently sit. Even the 1-foot or 2-foot minimum often cited feels negligible in the face of the substantial burden. And at the same time, failure to comply with FEMA guidelines and the NFIP requirements puts Asheville at risk of losing critical funding and disaster assistance, resources that our city desperately needs to rebuild. And this places me, and I think us as a council, in a position where our hands are tied. The relief our small business owners need must come from our state legislature and our federal partners. That said, my vote tonight is a reluctant yes, and here's why. I do think we need to ensure long-term resilience. I think we need to provide collaborative support for our small businesses. And I am committed to, and I think we as a council are committed to, working with small businesses, especially through the wonderful FAST at Asheville AshevilleNC.gov program, the SBA, the Disaster Hazard Mitigation Grant, to make properties and businesses more resilient. Also, it's a yes because we need to acknowledge our limitations. While I think businesses that have been part of our community for decades should have the opportunity to rebuild under a grandfathering provision, this power lies beyond our city's authority. We will continue to advocate for state-level variances that provide relief for existing businesses while holding new developments to updated standards. And, you know, it's important to note that even with these requirements, there's no guarantee they will protect against another flood event. Even businesses that complied with regulations in past floods still suffered substantial damage. And this underscores the need for comprehensive solutions that go beyond elevation requirements. Ultimately, my vote tonight is an acknowledgement of the legal constraints that we face and the need to ensure our participation in the NFIP while protecting future development. However, I remain deeply committed to advocating for meaningful relief for our small businesses and ensuring that the character and vibrancy of Asheville are not eroded by these changes. Thank you, Mayor.
I will add that I share your concerns and your sentiment. Putting the whole city's insurance and relief funding at risk is a key factor in my decision as well.
That kind of felt like a motion and a second. Is that okay?
I do have a quick question, I'm sorry.
But, I mean, we can have a motion.
Okay.
And then
And
more
still have a question.
questions.
Okay.
Do you mind reading the, do you have it up there? Does anybody have it? Anybody have the motion? I have the motion in front of me. Okay, everyone, you ask your question while everybody
Okay.
pull up the document attached to the agenda, and it has the motion, which has a lot of numbers in it, so.
What risks would we be posing ourselves to if we adopted the ordinance as recommended by staff tonight, but had the effective date, the implementation date, further out, say, the 1-year anniversary? Is that possible?
I can try to answer that question, Councilmember Allman. So what I think you're proposing is adoption of the changes, but the start date would actually be pushed out, so it wouldn't be immediately effective. To answer your question as best as I am able, I would say that the primary risk there is that that would likely be viewed by the National Flood Insurance Program as still being out of compliance for that period between now and the time that we would actually move into implementation. I cannot say how much the city might or would be docked, but it certainly is a possibility. I don't think that that is in compliance with what they have requested the city to do to remain in good standing at the current discount rates that we have. So I think that is the primary risk. Again, if we had something that was dated to start at some point in the future, again, during that period, it's important to note that the state building code, if remaining unchanged,
Right.
would still continue to require an elevation of essentially every one of these properties that exist in the floodplain that met these requirements. So the ambiguity in our code would continue to exist. So someone looking at our code only would perhaps not realize the fact that the state law is still going to impose those even during that transition period.
And so essentially, since the state law requires BFE +1, which for your actual building, that might be 6 feet, that might be 10 feet, depending, right?
That's correct. And
And
that is
we had-
only for certain buildings.
Right.
Other buildings already require base lead elevation +2.
And we had changed from 1 foot to 2 foot in 2009 as a lesson from the 2004 floods.
Correct.
I realize it's a reiteration, but is there a possibility that staff could explain how a property owner can be eligible for a different consideration or a variance if the building is considered historic?
If a building is considered historic, if it has a historic designation, there is the variance process that they go through. And there's a number of things that are outlined that they have to meet and supply us, but likely if they met all those requirements, they would be granted a variance. And then therefore, they would rebuild, they could rebuild back, like for like.
And the process in particular is granted through the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment grants all variances, so a petition to the Board of Adjustment for a variance would have to be made. They would review that and make a determination. So we can't promise that the Board of Adjustment would do that. I think in those cases, as described by Ms. Deaton, the city would not be objecting to the variance request. We're participating in those meetings, and generally speaking, with the concurrence of city staff, most variances, in my experience, have been granted.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anybody prepared to read the motion?
I have it. I make a motion to adopt the proposed text amendments of Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances, Section 7-2-4, Section 7-2-5, and Section 7-12-1, and find that the proposed amendments are reasonable, are in the public interest, are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meet the needs of the community, in that the amendment will, 1, align city regulations with state and federal requirements, 2, clarify development language to better support permit applications and city staff in the permitting process, and 3, simplify the city code for all users.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Kim, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that concludes our public hearings agenda. The last formal item on our agenda is Brad Branham Show. It is the resolution adopting the Asheville City Council 2025 legislative agenda. And thank you, Brad, for your work on this.
In advance, you're very welcome, Mayor and City Council. Good evening, once again.
And I just want to say, as Amy flees the room, thank you, Amy.
In appreciation for Amy, I'm going to do my very best to make this a one-time show. I know that Amy was requested back multiple times, but I hope that
That's right.
you will get enough of me this evening. Once again, City Council and the public, my name is Brad Branham. I have the pleasure to serve as your city attorney. This evening, I'm going to be presenting to you a proposed draft of the Asheville City Council 2025 legislative agenda. As always, I want to start out with a few key takeaways, which I believe encompass the most important aspects of this quick presentation. The North Carolina General Assembly is about to start back to business. In fact, they are going to be beginning their long session for 2025 tomorrow. The City Council's legislative agenda is the vehicle that we utilize to transmit your shared legislative goals, not only with our local delegation, but with the public at large. Now, this particular agenda for this year has been modified somewhat, and I want to highlight that as part of this presentation. The goal being to focus on those items of highest priority in this unique time in our city. It is also hopefully intended to utilize this vehicle to focus on those items most likely to receive legislative attention. As a result, what you're going to see is a much smaller legislative agenda that focuses entirely on those items that are directly related to Helene recovery efforts, as well as one zoning item that is intrinsically involved in your desire to build back better. I do want to point out that there are a number of existing, or I should say pre-existing, and continuing legislative priorities identified by this council, which will continue to be priorities of ours and advanced through alternative channels and potentially, if so, directed on future legislative agendas. Now, with regard to the long session, these happen in odd-numbered years. This being 2025, we are in an odd year, and therefore the long session of the General Assembly will happen. This is where the majority of the biannual legislation occurs within that body. Both local and general laws can be considered. General laws meaning they apply to the whole state. Local laws are those that just apply to a particular area. And there are some important deadlines to be aware of. Most particularly, I've listed here as February 13th and 20th is the deadline for local bills to be submitted to the Legislative Drafting Office. There's 2 dates there because it's one for the Senate and one for the House. The same for the deadlines to file those bills, February 27th and March 6th, depending upon if it's in the House or in the Senate. But as you can see, these are coming up very quickly. So it's important that we go ahead and move forward to finalize this legislative agenda in case any of the action would be codified as part of a local bill and need to meet one of these deadlines. Now, before you here is one page. It is the shortest legislative agenda that I've put together in my time before you as your city attorney, but I think it's important and it's pertinent to the times that we find ourselves in. Again, these items are completely focused on Helene recovery efforts. The goal, as I articulated earlier, is to allow our local delegation to have a laser focus on the items that are most pressing to our community and focusing on the recovery. Therefore, we have 3 items that are directly related to funding request. The first one is a request for the state to cover the 10% local match on FEMA-funded public assistance project. What is a public assistance project? This is the FEMA program that helps rebuild public infrastructure, roads, water systems, parks. All of these things are generally paid for up to a certain percentage by the federal government. In our case, we are fortunate that the federal government has agreed to pay 90% of the cost of our reconstruction of of local public assets. However, that 10% local match remains an obligation, and we are asking the state to cover that, and there's precedent for them having done that in the past. The second one, we are asking for local government revenue replacement funding to be made available, either in the form of grants or forgivable loans. It is true that the city has already received millions of dollars, either to be devoted specifically to reimburse us for some of the emergency response, or now in the reconstruction of our assets. And we have also received an early indication that we're likely to have a great deal of CDBG funding coming in. But all of those funding streams miss this particular item. None are currently allowed to replace the amount of local government revenue that was lost as a result of the storm. And that applies not just to the city of Asheville, but all of the local governments in the affected area. And those revenue streams are important because they allow the local governments such as us to maintain the services that are so desperately needed in normal times, much less now. So we're asking for assistance so that by the pending deadline, which is the end of this fiscal year at, by July 1, that the state government allows us to have some revenue funding to balance our budget as we are required to do by state law. And then the third item on the funding category is a bit of a catch-all. It is important to recognize that we are asking for ongoing monetary support and related legislative action. And what does that mean? We believe that although we are extraordinarily thankful for all of the funding that the state and federal government has provided us, this is going to be a long recovery and one that we will continue to need funding and legislative action to ensure that we not only come back as strong as we were before, but more resilient and in better condition than ever. And therefore, this is a catch-all. The longer description in the actual agenda calls out specifically our need for housing support for both individual and business economic recovery streams, as well as infrastructure, reconstruction, and resiliency support. But again, that this is not a point in time. This is going to be an ongoing relationship that we are asking for. And then finally, outside of the funding category, one item asking for reconsideration of recent changes to some local zoning authority. You've heard a little bit about SB 382 this evening in your previous presentation. I gave a much more detailed presentation to this council last week at your agenda briefing, but this essentially is part of some recent legislation that reduced your ability to do what is called down zoning. And without going into too much detail, I will say that it is likely that that power, which has long been part of local government authority, is going to be absolutely necessary for you to truly effectuate a resilient and total recovery. So we are asking for some reconsideration of that by the legislature. And I can say that we have fortunately seen some indication that they are willing to take this matter up and give it some consideration. So we wanted to include it because it is likely to receive attention and it's so important to the recovery efforts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I talked about not including for this year's legislative agenda some of your previous existing priorities. I want to point out again publicly that those items remain priorities. Simply because they do not appear on this one document that is so focused on our recovery needs does not mean that we will stop our efforts to advance them. Advocacy on these items is going to continue through all and alternative channels, including through both our federal and state lobbying teams. But by limiting this year's agenda to just those particular items that we discussed this evening that are focused on this unique point in time, we hopefully allow our legislative partners to have an additional laser focus on those as they advocate on our behalf. However, those pre-existing legislative agenda items can, and I likely assume will, be included on future legislative agenda items when we come back. Because I do think they are important, I want to take this opportunity to call them out. Not just to say that they are going to continue to be priorities, but let the public know what we continue to fight for outside of just this particular document. And they include supporting funding opportunities for investment in critical local infrastructure and services, supporting new state funding to assist property owners with reducing stormwater pollution, reforming the local occupancy tax utilization rules, opposing legislation that would limit reasonable regulation of short-term vacation rentals, supporting new legislation and state funding to encourage the development and the preservation of affordable housing, opposing legislation that would remove or further restrict local conditional zoning authority, supporting legislation that would update property taxation laws to provide greater protection and equitable treatment for homeowners, amending the North Carolina Fair Housing Act to include source of income and funds as a new protected class, supporting state and local reparations efforts, and supporting legislation that would require online short-term rental platforms to cooperate with local governments by including a locally issued permit to complete all rental listings. Now, with regard to timeline, I'm here before you this evening asking for your consideration on this agenda, which includes those items which have to this point received council consensus. And if so directed, tomorrow I will share this agenda with all of the members of our local delegation and begin the work in earnest to advocate for those things in the long session. We do have a couple of deadlines coming up soon in early to mid to late February to ensure that some of the local bills get filed. As to when the long session is going to end, we don't know. It's called a long session for a reason. It likely lasts a very long time, and in recent years it has lasted longer and longer. So we expect that this is going to go on for several months. I'll put your key takeaways back there one more time. I won't reiterate those, other than to say that, again, this is a little bit of a different agenda. It is very recovery focused, and it is done so for a reason. But it is very important for you and the public to know that our efforts on your other existing priorities continue, and they will continue through multiple channels and likely reappear on future agendas as well. With that said, Council, I thank you for your time. I do have a proposed motion up there, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I'd like to take the opportunity to name that we do have other needs in our community that weren't addressed tonight. I know that I spoke with educator organizations about the funding for our public schools. There was an ask if we could add that to our legislative agenda. We also have multiple asks to add very specific housing recovery asks in our legislative agenda. And in the spirit of gratitude, I just want to name Jeffrey Barton from Mountain Housing Opportunities outlined it better than I could have said it, including that the recovery-focused agenda is about budgets and not people. And so the 4 that Jeffrey suggested were rental assistance for low-income households, funding for temporary housing, tenant protections, and state housing tax credit. This was sent to the full council, and a suggestion that these could be included under item 3 in our agenda explicitly. If there was appetite for that on council, I'm happy to make the motion with just explicitly naming those 4 items in item 3 on our legislative agenda.
But I appreciate that. We did receive that email. I think what Brad's trying to help us do is keep our legislative agenda realistic and very, very focused. The items that Mr. Barton mentioned, other than the tax credits, are all things we can do with CDBG DR funds, which we have been awarded $225 million. Hopefully the pause memo is what I'm going to call it, does not disrupt that process. Also, it's unlikely that we will get those kinds of funds from the state legislature, but rather more from the federal government, which will be putting together another aid package in March. And may have another chance to go to Washington again to help that come together and see if there's an opportunity to put more funding there. We have been having discussions with our legislators about providing revenue loss funding, which I know Brad is working really closely on with our lobbyists too, to try to identify resources for that. There's some federal opportunity there as well that we're working on. So I would just, while I appreciate that there are so many things that we could include in this and that are so worthy, I think the idea here was to try to keep it very, very discreet and kind of big picture and see if we could get that achieved. It's going to be hard though. I think it's, you know.
That is correct, Mayor, and it is important to say that the early conversations I've had with our legislative delegation and some of the other representatives in Raleigh is that shorter is probably better in terms of making our asks. It's an easier thing for them to get their heads around. They also are very cognizant of not wanting to overlap funding with what the federal government may be offering. They've been very strong in their request to us to ask for what is left out of what the federal government provides. As the mayor pointed out, they do see the CDBG funds as being particularly allowable for a lot of the housing options, which I think Mr. Barton very articulately listed in his email to the council. We're going to continue to advocate for housing. We did call that out specifically, but we're trying to navigate around them having the feeling in Raleigh that we are asking for something that the federal government may already be providing to a degree. That seems to be a point of contention, so we're trying to be mindful of that.
Brad, thank you for your work and also your advocacy for the city. And also thank you for including, though it's a little cryptic and vague, but ongoing monetary and related legislative support. I think that's important, so thank you.
Quite welcome.
Okay, any other questions, comments, or a motion? do not, last I saw, we do not have anyone signed up to speak under this item.
Move to adopt a resolution to approve the City of Asheville 2025 legislative agenda and to direct the city attorney to provide the resolution to the members of our legislative delegation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Thanks for your work on that. Okay, we are moving into general public comment, folks. We do, reminder to council, we do have a closed session tonight. Brad estimates it will take about an hour, so just for your planning purposes. Folks who are signed up to speak, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please watch the lights on the lectern. Green means go, orange means it's getting close to your time is up, and red means your time is up. And the first person signed up to speak is Paul Howell.
Mayor, council, city attorney, city manager, assistant city managers, and of course, the glue that holds everything together, Maggie. Good evening. I haven't been here in a minute, so I'm gonna have to read this because I can't remember much, so I'm gonna read this off. Don't nobody interrupt me. Okay. Every time I hear affordable housing mentioned in Asheville, it scares the absolute plain chicken with a penguin out of me. As stated previously, Googling affordable housing in Asheville, housing authority properties come up. These properties are low-income housing, not affordable housing as misrepresented. I did some research. Low-income housing is designed for households earning below two different numbers, 50% or 60% of the area median income, which includes federally funded programs like public housing, Section 8 housing, and the low-income housing tax credit. Affordable housing is designed to ensure that working families and individuals can find housing within their budget, can include housing for households earning between 60 and 80% of the AMI. So, affordable housing isn't for low-income families unless they have a housing voucher. And we all know that there's only a few vouchers given out to a certain number of units, however that goes. But specifically, affordable housing is for those between 60 and 80% AMI. It's crazy how there's so much negativity connected to the projects, public housing, being they were built to see how black women with children would fare without a man in the home. Some 85 years later, after the establishment of HACA, 6/12/1940, the project began in 1950 with Lee Walker Heights. 9 years later, followed by Hillcrest. Urban removal began in the 1950s and continued through the 80s, which resulted in being adopted by Asheville as a new housing code in 1964. That code, these 61 years later, has successfully done what it established to do. Successfully destroyed the black family by removing the man from the home of his significant other and child or children. Successfully destroyed the black community by removing the man from the home of his significant other and his child or children. Successfully destroyed many black men by creating a sense of not having to be accountable and responsible to his family by removing him from the home of his significant other and his child or children. The rebirth of Asheville can fix all of that with affordable housing for low-income families. Low-income families. Damn, that was perfect timing. Thank you.
Thank you. Benjamin Mitchell.
Good evening again, Mayor, Council, professional staff. Thank you for your time this week. So first off, I want to thank all of you and this other city staff who participated in our recent community meetings with respect to the UDO change that was considered this evening. Certainly you all had a tough act and balancing act at that to consider what is a considerable change for the community at large and then specifically our historic areas. And throughout this process, we've had considerable gains that help those of us in the development community, those of us in historic districts, and so forth and so on. And I would encourage all of you to continue to look at what are certainly going to be changing federal guidelines as the new administration rolls out whatever plans it may with FEMA and otherwise. I also want to remind you, I think it was 2009 when this was last revisited by this body, that the FEMA publications I reviewed, I think it's publication 467 and 933, both identified that a municipal body anywhere in the country can consider two avenues when it comes to historic districts. I won't get into other areas of town tonight, but it seems to me that we elected in 2009 to go with the more restrictive route and require and allow for a variance process, which almost certainly will come with conditions, and those are identified in the publications mentioned. I'd like for you all to take into serious consideration as to whether it might be more appropriate for our historic districts to exempt them entirely when it comes to flood regulations and so forth and so on, so that those of us who are in an ongoing recovery effort, today is about 127 days or so on since we started preparing for this particular storm, and see that we can expedite our efforts without the expense, the delay, and the complexities that might be associated with variance processes on a going forward basis. And certainly you're empowered to do that, and I would like to offer my assistance to the extent that any of you deem that worthwhile. Thank you again.
Thank you. Timothy Sadler. Oh, good catch there, Maggie.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Timothy Sadler. It's nice to see everybody, particularly Bo. You know, an addition from the service industry. It's really refreshing to see. I've been out of town for some time, and I'm recently here receiving psychedelic-assisted therapy. It's a new phenomenon in the public health and mental illness sector. It truly has revolutionized my life and allowed me to put pieces into context that really weren't there, and kind of let me see kind of shadows that, you know, weren't really there. So I'm here to bring to your attention, again, the rise of this category in mental health, as well as the hurdles that exist for being able to access these treatments. I've been very lucky in that I've been able to do well in a regular job. I'm not out organizing for social issues as I've been here in the past doing. So I am incredibly privileged to be able to have access to this, and I just want to let it be known, you know, what it's done for me. We're at the tip of the iceberg with the ketamine treatments that are here in the city. But the most notable thing that I would like to mention tonight is ibogaine. Ibogaine is a plant-based medicine that you can reference. I hate to give Joe Rogan a plug, you know, could be a touchy topic, but nevertheless, he has Governor Rick Perry, who again, you know, might be on the other end of the spectrum, but it's really interesting to hear his relationship with a PTSD vet who I believe he had opioid addiction, but they speak on being able to reset serotonin and dopamine receptors in 2 days. Whereas the folks that we see out here on the street, it takes 18 months for them to get back to that level, which is why we continue to see the recidivism or the, you know, endless cycle of this, which is only getting worse in our country. So as the long session is here, you know, I would just ask for some consideration to start talking to our lawmakers. Texas is going to be the first state, and you know, let's see North Carolina come close behind, because it's truly for the people and in the best interest of the budget, really. So just ask for your attention on this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Randy Warren.
Madam Mayor, council people, staff. It took a lot of courage for Episcopalian Bishop Marion Buddy to directly call on President Trump to show compassion and mercy to the most vulnerable in our society. In that context, my own pastor's sermon this past Sunday reminded our congregation that when one of our society members suffers, that suffering affects all of us. He used an analogy provided by the Apostle Paul about how we are all part of one body, and just as one part of our body, if it's not healthy, it affects the entire body. If you have a toothache, a broken toe, or appendicitis, even though each one of these body parts are very small, the rest of the body cannot go on as if everything is okay. Our national government has taken on a new way of doing things recently. People who disagree with leadership are not only discounted, but shamed and dismissed. I hope our local government is different, that you can set an example of how you show mercy to the vulnerable, how you listen to the voices of those who you govern. It's understandable that things are not business as usual around here after Helene. As I walk through my still damaged family room and out the door into my still missing carport, I am reminded daily of the lingering effects of Helene. In those first days and weeks after the storm, it's understandable that you, as our governmental leaders, were laser focused on dealing with all the chaos that the storm brought to our city. What has happened in the ensuing months, however, is that you have ignored the organized and qualified voices of the public. We have city commissions and committees who have the expertise to give valuable advice and guidance as we work through the aftermath of Helene. I have personally seen misguided decisions made by the city. If the city would have brought these topics to the commission that I serve on, I know that the advice would have been contrary to the decisions made. That opportunity for public input, however, was taken away from our citizens. When Asheville recently tried to get rid of most of our commissions and committees, you heard loud and clear that is not what our city wants. Please show mercy to the most vulnerable of our citizens. Please work to make Asheville's whole body healthy. Please do not mimic the indifference of our national leadership by believing that only you know what is best. Restore our city's commissions and committees and listen to the voices of your constituents, the citizens of Asheville. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would, just on that point, that we do have a meeting coming up, just sort of a general announcement for our chairs and vice chairs of our committees. Someone's reminding me of the date.
Tuesday, 4.
February 4th, at Harris Cherokee Banquet Center to talk about hurricane recovery. The point of that meeting is to get input from our boards and commissions, chairs and vice chairs ahead of the council's retreat, which will be 13th. I was going to say Valentine's Day. So thank you for that message, but just wanted to provide that PSA in conjunction with that statement. The next person signed up to speak is Nina Tovish.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and city staff. I'm speaking to you in advance of your retreat and your consideration of the city budget. I moved to Asheville 12 years ago, and in that period of time, I've sadly been witnessed 2 major disasters overtake our local economy. The first, as we know, was the pandemic. And had it not been for a massive infusion of government aid from the federal government, downtown Asheville would have become a ghost town. We recovered because there were people in the federal realm who understood what was needed to help our city recover from that. Now we've had Helene and we face another economic disaster. I want to be clear that what I'm saying this evening is not in any way to disparage the importance of tourism in our economy. Clearly, it will always be one of the linchpins of our local economy because who doesn't want to visit Asheville? We have so much to offer. However, as you prepare to go into your retreat and consider our city's budget, I ask you urgently to look at our future through the lens of economic sustainability, and specifically the sustainability sector of our local economy. And by that I mean not just the obvious direct importance of the firms that provide things like solar energy and wind power and other forms of energy, renewable energy. We also need to consider sustainability in terms of agriculture, transportation, food systems, and the educational opportunities that we offer to people who come here to learn from our local institutions of higher education. We have the potential to grow tremendously in these areas because we already have a great foundation. What's needed and what we can do that will be incredibly valuable for our local economy is to consciously invest in making sure that these sectors of our economy survive and thrive, bringing good jobs and educated people to work in them. This gives us another really strong leg for our economy that can provide a level of resilience that we otherwise lack. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Jared Wheatley, and Maggie's loading your presentation.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Vice Mayor. Just to be clear, this is a 30-minute interactive presentation cut down to 3 minutes, so we're going to do what we can here. What I've come to talk about tonight is the confusion around displacement as a word and local housing policy impacts. So this is an introduction to myself. You guys probably know me, guys and gals, excuse me. Folks know me. But this is, to be clear, you know, me and my family are Tsalagihi, which is Cherokee of the West. Okay, what that means is inside of who we are, we've survived genocide through removal on the Trail of Tears. And my family has also survived ethnocide through my grandfather's survival of the Indian boarding schools. So when I speak of ethnocide and genocide, I come from a lived experience and conversation growing up in our household. I have an educational background and development background that also reinforces my understanding of the way the economy and development moves. So gentrification, this is directly from ChatGPT, which is evidently the summation of all our intelligence. And within that, you'll see the definition includes a cultural shift and change of character as wealthier residents move into an area. Within ethnocide, you'll see the suppression and destruction of cultural practices and loss of cultural identity. What this means is that definitionally, gentrification includes ethnocide. So gentrification is not independent of ethnocide. And then it further states this under gentrification by saying it is disproportionately affects racial minorities. So going into our neighborhoods and policies coming before council, these are Venn diagrams is the way to think about this. So affluent neighborhoods have relatively low opportunity for increased housing stock and almost no opportunity for gentrification because it's already happened there. and also almost no opportunity for ethnocide because it is part of the dominant culture. That is what affluence looks like. So attainable neighborhoods have a larger supply opportunity with some overlap in gentrification and some overlap in ethnocide. However, legacy neighborhoods are unique in the sense that they're a relatively small footprint. They do have housing supply opportunities. However, they actually always come with gentrification and ethnocide. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jonathan Wainscott.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Wainscott, and I did not come here tonight to ridicule, scold, throttle, or mock my elected officials in their own house, even though that is one of my favorite things to do. I came here tonight to express gratitude and thanks and just give public recognition to a fantastic member of the community and just ambassador of humanity in general, my good friend, Paul Howell, who I've come to know and adore, coming to these meetings every, couple of weeks. So Paul is a guy who brings it. He, as you saw earlier, he does his homework. He's looked into all of the things. He doesn't come here with one grind or just a couple like I do. And I just wanted him to, know what a special person he is. He has no idea that I'm saying this. I sat down next to him and he's like, oh, what are you going to say? I can't wait to hear it. And he doesn't even know. So I just wanted to implore the citizenry of the entire universe, the city of Asheville, the county of Buncombe, to be more like Paul. If you're ever looking for a purpose in life, be a good guy like Paul. And I just wanted to say thanks. He calls me Jay Dizzle, which is a fantastic honor. And, he calls me his friend, too, which is an even higher honor. So I just wanted to come out and do this all for Paul. Thank you, Paul, yeah, look at you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Jay Dizzle. Right. David Moritz.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council. Thank you for letting me speak. After the hurricane, a lot of us probably thought about throwing in the towel on Asheville. It was a challenging time. And then, of course, thanks to your leadership and our resilience, we're deciding to be resilient and work at rebuilding our city. And I think that's important. I mean, we've all had damage, some much worse than others. But we've also found out that we're committed to the city. We have deep roots. I've been here for 12 years, and I've established deep roots here, so I'm not going anywhere. And so I'm going to reinvest in the city. Already have, and there are some challenges. For example, insurance. We've been dropped in insurance in some commercial property. There's problems with banks, and there's all sorts of things, but I'm committed to the city, and we all need to be resilient to make that work. And then, so having said that, I just actually, Maggie made a quote that was related to what I was going to talk about, which is, what's going to restrict, drive, and inhibit growth? And I thank you, Maggie, for stating that, because I know we're talking about money and resources, but some of the things I want to talk about are a little bit less about the financial and about the city helping us do things better. So as you know, I have a project that I'm trying to build. It's small apartments, and it's challenging because it's infill. And so one of the things is we need to have a crane, for example, and that could cost upwards of $500,000 to have a crane. And now we have additional costs like insurance, and the banks are difficult. And one of the solutions, for example, for me, and I'm just talking from my experience, is that we could save a significant amount of money if we could close the street partially. Because in an infill development, we have our front of the building right against the sidewalk. And we're going to be rebuilding the sidewalk to the benefit of the city. But the cost in trying to do it in such a small space is very high. And that's one of the challenges we've had in terms of starting our project. One small thing that would help us would, for example, would be to be able to close the road so we could put scaffolding on the sidewalk there and save significant money. And that could make a difference in terms of starting the project or not. And so I know our contractor said it's not possible. I'd like to start understanding what the city can do to help us facilitate some of the things that won't actually cost the city any money in terms of being a little bit flexible, maybe, doing things when we get started, there are hurdles that happen. I'd like to start rebuilding a city. I have a project that's ready. We have challenges that make it cost prohibitive, and I'd like to work with the city and figure out ways when we go to staff and we have suggestions and trying to make it work, who we can talk to and who can help us overcome challenges to rebuilding our city. And that's what I'm here to just propose. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Mejia.
Good evening. For the most part, I have something prepared when I come to speak. In full honesty, after last week, I don't know what I was going to say. You know why I'm here, the continuous support for mass deportation across the country, the continued, sorry, I find this difficult. Last week, I stated very clearly what is happening. Over a week or more later, it is still happening. Missouri is close to passing a law that would enact any so-called illegal immigrant to be labeled a felon and given life imprisonment. I said the other week that the two largest prison corporations in this country are building massive facilities to hold deportees because they can't take them all at once, because they want to use them for labor, because this is what this country is, because we have a loophole in the 13th Amendment that allows for slavery in prisons, because we have all these methods to allow supposedly for citizenship, but even myself, who's a veteran, had to go through 1 million loopholes to get my family residency, and they're still not safe. You know all this. So the thing I keep coming back to is, what can you do? Because I know you're not in charge of immigration legislation. I know you can't influence the president, but you have something I don't. You have a position of power. You have a voice. You have social media. You have a platform. You have the ability, power. I'm wondering if you have the willingness to say you do not support the president's unconstitutional actions, that you recommend the Asheville Chief of Police and the sheriff to not follow any orders given by federal immigration. You can say wholeheartedly that you support the immigrant workers in this country, because if we're talking about tourism dollars, do you know what happens when we don't show up to your restaurants and hotels, when my parents don't? When they're taken away? Your city comes to a standstill. I don't know what else to say, because I really don't know if this is getting to you. And you can't say anything, and you won't. So just do something. Use your voice, because very soon you will lose the opportunity to do so. And when you do, you will lose members of your community forever. I like Asheville. I'd like to stay. I'd like to have my family here. I'd like to not be put in a prison because of my family's immigration status, because I'm not safe. I'm a veteran, but they've picked up veterans and citizens. They don't care. It says Hispanic on my driver's license, so they want me gone. So please, for the love of God, my representatives, protect me. Protect my family. Tell your superiors they are wrong and they are genocidal.
Thank you.
Daniel Cairo.
Good evening, Council. I've been living in Asheville for 5 years. This is my first City Council meeting. Happy to be here, happy to see the whole process. What prompted me to come to this one was the topic of affordable housing, especially post-Helene. It's relevant for me as someone in the food and beverage industry. It's been disheartening to see the industry take advantage of the conditions to lower wages, all the while rents have stayed the same. On my end, I had total lack of contact with my landlord throughout Helene, only for them to come back 2 months later, demand 2 months of rent, threaten eviction, and I had lost a month of income. It was not an easy situation to deal with. It was nice to hear you guys talk about, ways to incentivize more housing, but I encourage you guys to think about the ways in which housing can be less exploitative in the city. I, for one, feel, I've been here for 5 years. I love Asheville. The Blue Ridge Mountains just spiritually feel like home for me, but it's becoming increasingly hard to financially make it here. And especially in the food and beverage industry, it is almost the lifeblood of the city. Tourism is a big part of it, and we're the ones that feed the tourists and excite them. We create the nightlife, and if we can't even make sense financially to stay here, it's a problem. So in addition to how can we get more housing, how can we incentivize more building, also think about how can we make it easier for the people that make this city alive. How can we make it easy for them to stay here long term? Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, everyone, that concludes our general public comment. And we do have a closed session, so I'm going to ask Councilman Hess to read the closed session motion.
Yes, thank you. I move that the Asheville City Council go into closed session for the following reasons. 1, to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A1. The law that makes the information privileged and confidential is North Carolina General Statutes 143-318-10E. 2, to consult with an attorney employed by the city about matters with respect to which the attorney-client privilege between the city and its attorney must be preserved, including, but not limited to, providing instruction to an attorney concerning the handling of a claim. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A3. 3, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee, or to hear or investigate a complaint, charge, or grievance by or against an individual public officer or employee. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A6.
Second?
All right, that was a motion and a second. That was a really long one. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will adjourn from the closed session.